Hello all. So the BBC looks like it's shaking on its feet at this point. The Director General and the new CEO have both resigned in the wake of the story. They did indeed doctor the footage of Donald Trump speaking. As I've said before, this really has been the smoking gun that many people have been looking for over the years. We all know they stock political panels in certain directions to put forward the editorial line they want. They can be quite manipulative and so on, but they're normally very subtle in doing this. It's hard to find that big smoking gun, and well, now it's been found. Now, it's obvious why Director General Tim Davie and the new CEO had to resign. I mean, you can't simply explain this away as just sloppy editing. You know, they doctored together a speech that Donald Trump gave with statements that were 50 minutes apart to mislead the public. And remember, the BBC goes out internationally, so it wasn't just the British public they're misleading. They're misleading, essentially, the world conversation on Donald Trump. And I'm sure over the next few days and weeks we can expect to see the BBC playing innocent, saying, oh, we didn't know about any of this, it was just an honest mistake. You know that if you're speaking about probably the most powerful man in the world at the time, in the biggest election in the world, and you're splicing together clips, people knew what was going on right from the top. I mean, if that wasn't the case, why on earth would the leaders of the organisation bother retiring for? Anyway, what's been so interesting in the aftermath of this, the immediate aftermath, by the way, is how all of the liberal BBC mouthpieces have already come out with their counter-argument. And you can probably guess what it is already. The frickin' nerve of these people. He's David Yelland, he's a BBC presenter of some sort. He says the fall of Tim Davie is a victory for populists, for a cabal of toxic plotters with links to the BBC board who designed and executed a coup and the circular firing squad in the UK press. It is not a good day for our values or our country. Yeah, funny how they don't see our national state broadcaster splicing together clips of the most powerful man in the world to try and subvert democracy isn't a bad day for our values and our country. I mean, come on, this sort of behaviour makes Soviet propagandists put their heads in shame. I mean, the brazen hypocrisy on display here is quite unbelievable. Here's leader of the Lib Dems, Ed Davey. He states the BBC isn't perfect, but it remains one of the few institutions standing between our British values and a populist Trump-style takeover of our politics. Well, what are our British values? Lying about political leaders to suit your agenda. Here's Adam Bolton, famous for his long-term association with Sky News, but still part of the liberal machine, as he's proving by these comments. For the record, no words were put into Trump's mouth. The quotes were him saying what he said. I mean, it's just unbelievable that the leading journalists in the country don't understand that if I was out down the pub with my friend and said, oh, I could murder a pint, but I've got to go home and feed my cat, and my friend recorded that and spliced it into, I've got to go home and murder my cat, that would be lying and appalling behaviour. I mean, these people aren't brain dead. They must know that they're lying and propagandising for the BBC again. Here's this woman, Ava Santina. She's one of these angry women, on the talk shows yelling about white men and how everyone's racist, the type. She says BBC should have held fast on editorial decision, Ari Panorama. Journalists always splice together most important lines of political speech. Dear Lord, moral panic over general practice. Ridiculous. Now, again, when someone's been caught red-handed, it is unbelievable and infuriating that people act this way. But we should remember, this is actually probably a benefit if you're anti what the BBC has become and what the liberal regime promotes, because it just shows how committed they are to propaganda at this point. They've completely lost touch with trying to get to the truth objectively. The hard truth is we're now living in a world of spin, whichever angle you look at it. It's why Emily Maitlis, host of that News Agents podcast, it's basically where a bunch of snooty centre-left shitlibs complain about the world, states that they weren't going to do a show yesterday. Surprise, surprise. And they're going to do one today. Well, why do they need 24 hours? Obviously, it's to come up with their editorial narrative, which shifts the focus away from the BBC. And we can all see what's coming. What the BBC did was wrong, but it was an honest mistake. Of course, if it was a right-wing organisation that did it, it would be pitchforks at the ready. But, we have to recognise here the real problem isn't the BBC. No. It's those evil populists on the right who are subverting our democracy. Anyway, do listen out for the news agents later to see if I'm anywhere near being on the money with that one, although Emily Maitlis has let the cat out of the bag a bit prematurely already. She tweeted this on Twitter, where a guy is saying, it should not be a matter for Trump who runs the BBC. Ironically enough, the newsagents utilise the same technique as the BBC and other sort of shit-lip types like Rory Stewart by presenting themselves as sensible, as calm, as thoughtful, as empathetic, and as the people that you can trust. All of this is just another form of propaganda, really. It's reminiscent of the Milgram experiment you may have heard of. It's where a psychologist in the 60s called Stanley Milgram got people to dress in white lab coats and then told participants in the study to deliver electric shocks to human beings of an extremely dangerous level. People would obey simply because the person telling them to do it was wearing a white lab coat. And this is how the Rory Stewarts, the BBCs and the newsagents work too. They present themselves as prim and proper and sensible, rational centrists, but in reality they parrot the same talking points as the Guardianistas, Novara Media and even Vice magazine. Case in point, when the BBC commission an objective look into the British Empire hosted by historian David Olusoga, do you think it's going to be a fair and balanced insight? Now, I've watched enough History Debunked to know that this Olusoga fella seems like one of these radical leftists more than a historian with an extreme racial grievance on his shoulder too. And it's such a tragedy, all of this, because how interesting would be a fair, objective documentary on empire and its history? It would be fascinating. And of course, in watching such a documentary, you'd expect there to be elements of it which shine a very dark light on Britain and Europe. It's a complicated legacy. Sins occurred that have been acknowledged but should be remembered. But there's also, the advance of civilization, lots of good that the empire brought, but we know that will be completely ignored in favour of post-colonial theory, racial grievance, and an editorial line that will buttress the ideology of the modern multicultural state. And like so much of the output from the BBC, so many of us just don't bother watching it because we know it's propaganda in the favour of the liberal regime. So when these snooty liberal types start hand-wringing and complaining about the fall of the BBC due to populism, the rest of us think, God, give us a bloody break. The reason the strength of feeling is so strong towards the BBC isn't because people woke up one day and thought, oh, you know what, I hate the BBC now because I'm an evil right-winger. It's because the BBC turned on them, and the BBC was something that we all loved. Now, I dare say I speak for many of us when I say we have fond memories of watching the BBC back in the 90s, watching Grandstand with your old man, checking out all the sport, watching the comedy shows with the whole family, Fawlty Towers, Only Fools and Horses when Del and Rodney dressed up as Batman and Robin and chased away those criminals in the Christmas special. The reality is, the public loved these shows. They felt at home with the BBC, who felt largely non-political. And then somewhere along the line, a beloved old grandad in British culture decided to transition into a bolshy feminist lesbian. And from that point on, it became Blairism, bias, woke lectures and multicultural propaganda, and bit by bit we tried to hold on to the BBC but were just pushed away further and further, and like so many institutions in modern Britain, we had to go through a grieving process for something we once loved, but now it's gone and we're over it. And this brings the BBC with the latest drama to a very difficult realisation. It's still convinced it's objective and centrist and balanced, but the rest of us have realised for a while it's not. The reality is you can't truly be wholly objective in life. You're always going to have some subjectivity via your own personal biases or the ideological system you've been born in, the nation, the culture you've been born in. But if you're representative of a largely homogenous nation, you can get a lot closer to objectivity than a heterogeneous nation. And in this changing world, the BBC has been something of an island of elite liberalism and Blairite conformity as they drift further and further away from the public they were once supposed to serve. In essence, the BBC has become as politically partisan as any private media organisation. It's just we get kicked in the teeth because we have to pay for their propaganda. However, the problem now is that they can't hide from it anymore. They've been exposed that they think they can even manipulate the public into thinking what they want them to think. But the game is up. But the BBC can propagandise against figures like Donald Trump as much as they like, because even if their plan worked, the reality is that the fault line goes right through the West now, Donald Trump or not. On the one side, you have the globalist liberal regime, and on the other side, you have the more traditional, national, anti-globalist movement. The BBC have already picked sides and made their bed, and that's why they have to stand on their own 2 feet now. They cannot expect public support when they're such blatant propagandists. Again, it doesn't give me pleasure to say that. In principle, I'm pro the idea of a public service broadcaster, especially one with the great legacy of the BBC. But when such an institution is weaponized against the public, what purpose does it really serve apart from one of subversion? So just remember, over the next few days when you hear from our liberal overlords how the BBC is a bastion for democracy, it's about tolerance and kindness and mutual respect and democracy. What these people really mean is, it's a propaganda tool for our regime, and you shall not destroy it, because you'll do what we say.